你认为为什么现在年轻人都不想生小孩呀？
因为可能首先是自己比较自由，然后带小孩的话可能就比较麻烦，然后再就是经济问题吧，可能自己一个人的话什么都能买，然后带小孩还要给他买一份，我就觉得不太那个，所以我也不太喜欢。
没钱，真的是没钱。有钱的话谁不想生啊？多可爱的东西啊！但是没钱，而且我觉得会影响我生活质量。其实，如果我的孩子是生下来是为了继承我的贫穷、我的苦难，我觉得不生他是对他的一种善良。
现在00后的人可能都比较想要享受生活，而不是为了生活而生活。因为生小孩太痛了，肚子上会留下毛纹，就很丑。我觉
得可能是生活成本太高了吧，是吧？养小孩需要很多成本嘛，然后还有就是要给他很多的爱、很多的时间要去陪伴他，所以可能自己都还没有养活，怎么养一个小孩？
生孩子，我觉得我太有发言权了，因为我。
Why do people nowadays not want to have kids? I think I have a lot of right to speak. Because I've had a child, and I'm also someone's child. This kid thing, you only know after you've raised one. Really only those few years are cute. It will make your motherly love overflow. It will make your sense of happiness explode. After that it's all responsibility. You have to worry about their height, weight, teeth, and personality, their Chinese, essays, math, English, spoken English, science, PE, and extracurricular classes. They eat snacks and drink sugary beverages, they play on their phone and watch TV, and they also want you to buy a little kid smartwatch. Their winter and summer vacations are really annoying. Once they get to primary school they start talking back. Once they get to middle school they don't love you that much. Once they get to high school they don't even pay attention to you. Once they get to college they only ask you for money. After college they still ask you for money. After they get married and have kids they still ask you for money. When you're old and sick, when you ask them for a little money, it's not that you can't get it, it's that most likely they will also be having a hard time, and they will also start their cycle of supporting a family and getting by. When you die, most likely they won't be by your side either. Either they're at work, or they're with their partner and kids. When you're already old, you still have to worry about where you'll die. Either you die in the hospital, or you die at home, and if it's even worse, you might die outside.
最近刷到很多人在说中国2025年的新生人口只有300万。
Recently, I've seen many people saying that China's number of newborns in 2025 will be only 3 million. I didn't really believe it, so I went to check it myself using search engines. It's actually not 3 million. From January to June of 2025, the number is between 4.02 million and 4.06 million, and the estimate for the whole year is roughly around 8 million. Although that's more than 3 million and not as alarmist as some claims, if you think about it carefully, it's still not a large number. With a population of 1.4 billion, whether it's 3 million or 8 million, that's roughly around 5%, actually less than a 5% birth rate. This birth rate is already very low. That made me think of some things. For example, my hometown is a small city in Heilongjiang. When I was in school, each grade had about 100 students. Now, each grade has fewer than 30 students. So when we grow old, how many people will still be living in places like that? I honestly don't know. What we can see now is that there are fewer and fewer schools and kindergartens. What should we do in the future? Just thinking about it feels quite scary. What do you think?
到底是谁让中国人不愿意再生孩子了？
Who on earth made Chinese people unwilling to have children anymore? Turning the nation that cares the most about carrying on the family line in the world into negative population growth. They would rather carry the of being unfilial, and still refuse to have children. In 5 years, the number of births has dropped by 40%, and the net population increase has dropped by 90%. The speed of population shrinking shocked the whole world. Even the authorities, unprecedentedly, came out and said young people should not indulge in material enjoyment, and should get married and have children early. But the question is, can young people really carry this blame? Can they really afford it? Fewer marriages and a low fertility rate are just a surface phenomenon. So where exactly is the deeper problem? What others don't dare to say, today I will say it. Today I will tear off this layer of disguise, and let's take a look together at who the real culprit is. Data shows that the number of marriage registrations is already less than half of what it was 10 years ago. This is only a surface. Dig deeper and you'll find that education, housing and healthcare, these are what truly make people unable to straighten their backs. To raise a child, you first face these 3 mountains. That's just how it is. For example, our neighbor North Korea, Don't look at how their economy isn't that great, but their education, housing and healthcare are all free. Their fertility rate is 1.9, one of the healthiest population structures in Asia. Now look at South Korea next door. Although they talk about high welfare, in reality education and healthcare are highly capitalized. Tuition from kindergarten to high school looks free, but the cost of after-school tutoring can bankrupt a family. Although the medical reimbursement rate is 80%, if you really get sick, you still have to spend quite a lot of money. Ordinary South Koreans spend more than 20% of their income every month on these two items. Look at those ordinary families in Korean dramas. High school girls already start working while studying. That kind of plot is not made up, it's a real portrayal. What's even more outrageous? Housing prices. Seoul's price-to-income ratio reached 21 times. That means you don't eat or drink for 21 years, and only then can you barely buy a home in Seoul. Tokyo's housing prices are high, but their price-to-income ratio is only a bit over 10, and the fertility rate is 1.08. Then look at Seoul again, a fertility rate of 0.7, the lowest in the world. Housing prices, education and healthcare have crushed young people's willingness to have children into pieces. Alright, now let's come back to ourselves. In China these past few years, housing prices have soared, and education costs and healthcare costs also press people until they can hardly breathe. Look at how many ordinary people drain their parents' savings, sell everything to buy a home. On the surface they have a million yuan asset, but in reality they don't even have 5,000 yuan in cash on hand. In that situation, who dares to have a baby? Once a child is born, formula, education and healthcare, you can't escape any of them. In big cities, if you want to get into a better school, just any training class starts at several thousand yuan. Living in a home worth millions or tens of millions, yet it doesn't add even a tiny bit of security for the next generation's life. In the end, high housing prices and expensive education and healthcare costs are the best contraceptive. When a person's input is infinitely large and the return is infinitely small, think about it, who would still be willing to jump into this bottomless pit? What's even more brutal is that these problems are not isolated cases. And the overall pressure of the whole society now, no ordinary person can escape it. So the true culprit that kills the fertility rate is not young people. Not that they are irresponsible, but the unsolvable problems of healthcare, education, and housing. When young people can't see hope for the future, they start choosing to be dink, or simply lie flat. As long as these three mountains of education, healthcare, and housing are not removed for a single day, our country's fertility rate cannot rise. You can shout as many slogans as you want, it's all useless. Of course, this social environment, when it lands on each of us, it's deep helplessness, it's being forced, there is no way. Who doesn't want a warm home with a spouse and kids? Who doesn't want children and grandchildren filling the house? But in such a social environment it's only a luxury. What can ordinary people do? Earn more money, and keep their small family going. Parents are anxious about their kids getting married. After all, kids represent future hope. Who doesn't want to say they have no descendants, right? Many people in China in their 40s and 50s are still worrying about their kids. Relying on only one man going to work to earn money to support a family of 3 is getting harder and harder. And basically it all requires parents to help out. I also hope these mountains pressing on ordinary people can be moved away as soon as possible. Only when the pressure is smaller will young people dare to have children, dare to get married, and we won't repeat South Korea's path.
你觉得现在为什么年轻人越来越不想生小孩了？
Why do you think young people are increasingly unwilling to have kids now? To be honest, the first reason I don't want to have kids is that I feel I don't have enough material foundation. I feel raising a child is pretty expensive. I feel I want to give them a relatively good educational environment, and the people around them should be kind and decent. This means I need money, right? It means I need a school district home, or it means I need enough financial conditions to send them to a private school. This is a big problem standing between us. Another thing is that I feel in our parents' generation, having kids was just for the sake of having kids. They didn't know what they were doing. Other people had kids, so I had kids too. Or you get married and you have to have kids, or the older generation says give me a child, and they have one. They didn't know what that means. Our generation grew up under this kind of confusion. So I'm thinking, if I become a parent, I must think clearly about what I'm doing. I know after this little life is born, what I can bring them. I'm not relying on them to support me in old age. I'm not relying on them to give me face. It's not that I once wanted to get into Tsinghua or Peking University and I didn't, so I expect them to do it. They are an independent person. They are outside of me. They are not my child. They are not mine. They are themselves. Before I can let them realize all this freedom, I must first realize myself. Only when I can realize myself can I give them a sufficiently full, sufficiently free space for upbringing. Only then am I worthy of being a mother. It's not that, oh, you just have one because you have one, and no matter how you have one, someone will raise them anyway. I think that's too irresponsible. Anyway, that's how I am.
China's number of newborns has fallen to a level so low that even the United Nations has begun to sound the alarm. As this year draws to a close, UN projections estimate that China's births in 2025 will be only 8.71 million, a decrease of 830,000 from last year, marking the lowest level since the founding of the People's Republic of China. What does this mean? In the early years after the country was founded, China had a population of just over 500 million, yet it still recorded more than 20 million births per year, more than twice today's level. Even compared with 2016, when births reached over 18.8 million, this year's figure represents not just a halving, but an even deeper drop beyond that. What are the implications? China's share of global births may soon fall below 7%. At its peak, this figure was as high as 27%, meaning that 1 out of every 4 babies born worldwide was Chinese. Today, it may take 14 newborns globally to include just 1 Chinese child. According to the United Nations' most aggressive earlier projections, if China's total fertility rate were to fall to 1.1, the country's population could shrink to 630 million by the end of this century. But what is the reality? China's total fertility rate had already fallen below 1.12 years ago, a situation so unexpected that even the UN itself would likely be taken aback. Even regions often described as China's fertility champions appear weak by global standards. Provinces such as Tibet and Ningxia, which have the highest birth rates in the country, now show fertility levels comparable to Australia and Ireland. Developed countries known for late marriage and low fertility, and are even below the global average. If we look at northeast China, as well as the core urban areas of Beijing and Shanghai, fertility rates have fallen to levels even lower than South Korea, the country currently known as having the world's lowest birth rate. In these regions, fertility has dropped beyond what can be considered a normal comparative range. So why are people no longer having children? Beyond changes in attitudes toward marriage and family, the core reason can be summed up in one word: cost. Surveys show that in China, raising a child from birth to college graduation costs an average of 680,000 yuan. In first-tier cities like Beijing and Shanghai, the figure easily exceeds 1 million yuan, even without factoring in school district housing. For young people, having a child is almost equivalent to taking on massive debt. However, choosing not to have children also creates serious economic consequences. A population decline feeds back into the economy, affecting industries such as real estate, education, and healthcare, whose revenues are closely tied to birth numbers. Changes in population structure will have a profound impact on the national economic framework and ultimately reshape income levels and opportunities for everyone. Of course, every trend has two sides. For ordinary people, a smaller population may mean less pressure on housing prices, better job prospects, and reduced competition in exams and education. Take the college entrance exam as an example. This year, 13.35 million students registered for the Gaokao. By 2040, that number is expected to fall to just over 9 million. In other words, getting into college will become easier in the future. Ultimately, population trends are like a massive ship, extremely difficult to turn around. Only by making substantial investments, providing meaningful subsidies, and reducing the burden on families, transforming childbirth and child-rearing from a form of near-bankruptcy-level consumption into a long-term investment that ordinary families can afford, will it be possible to stabilize China's fertility rate.